third cup of Joe, second nicotine packet down, more to come. It's a cold, cold day, and roommates are gone, and I've just got some time on my hands. I halfway want to hunt, but I don't know if it's worth weathering the cold right now. But who knows, I might just change my mind. Part of me likes to be out in the cold, doing something, hunting or fishing. You know, you can always stay cooped up for so long before you need to breathe some cold air, freeze your toes off for a little bit, just to know you're still alive, just to know you're still a man. Because sometimes I feel like I'm not even a man, you know? I feel like our culture doesn't want us to experience and know what it means like, what it feels like to be a man. And they do everything they can to keep that from happening. I think they do that in the culture, and I think they do that, frankly, in the church. The church. Not as in the body of Christ, but as in the building you go into where, you sing your 2, 3 songs, and then you have a sermon, and then do all that. Sing your elevation worship songs that, they got some good ones, but that's something I've really learned recently. Is I've had people tell me, close people to me that I grew up with, particularly family like sisters, sisters and my dad, that, oh, you've changed, Clark. You've changed. You used to be this sweet guy. You used to be this. That's what they would say. You used to be so sweet. Where'd that kid go? My dad says that a lot. And then my sisters, I don't know, they just get pissed when I'm being me. And, you know. And the more I think about it, not the more I think about it, but the way it is I've become more of a man in some ways. I grew up in a house of girls with not really encouraged to embrace my manhood. Let's just say that. I'll leave it at that. And it was pretty substantial, but like everything, you don't realize it when you're there. You don't realize how you're being raised while you're being raised. And then I started running into problems once I grew up and got on my own. I was like, oh, shoot, the world is scary and the world is tough, um and I don't want to be a feminine person. I want to be a man. I started doing man things. I started being more outspoken. Not to just be outspoken, but just to tell truth, right? The ideal is truth. So if you think something, if you've realized something wrong with a system, with the church, with the culture, with the political system, with how men and women interact, if you have problems with the modern woman, right, as us guys often do these days, and you see that they're just all messed up from social media and from whatever, if you have problems with the church not living up to what it should live up to, and you start saying that, you need to start saying that. That's the truth of it, right? You need to do it in the right way, the proper way, not just to be provocative, but... And that's what I often do. We'll just be sitting around the table in family discussions and something, and, I'll say, I don't know, usually something leads to it, and maybe my opinion comes out about women in voting, or for whatever reason, something wrong with churches and whatever. And then this whole argument starts, and then that's where I get, oh, Clark, you've changed. Oh, Clark, you smoke cigars now. You can't smoke cigars at my house. I've gotten that. Um, just spit. Why are you spitting? No woman wants a guy that spits and does nicotine and cigars and drinks 10 cups of coffee a day. So, but the funny thing is, I feel like if you embrace your manhood more, Now if you want to be ignoring it and, be a little more on the soft side, you can, but if you embrace your manhood, you'll lose some friends. You'll lose some. You'll rub some people the wrong way because that's what we guys do. We're disagreeable by nature. That's how we are able to start revolutions and build countries and all kinds of stuff and compete, in sports and whatnot. But so yeah, you'll rub some people the wrong way, but you'll find a new tribe. And I've found a new tribe, and I've maintained relationships with men that are like-minded in my old tribe, right? And it's because they're like-minded. They want to be men. They see you as a man. They respect you, and you become real close. Especially in this day and age when there's not a lot of strong guys, and um, yeah, you want to be around that testosterone, that energy, that vitality, the the humor, the non PC-ness, I mean, man, you should just, yeah. I mean, you should see it once you see it. Once you're around some guys that are just free to be themselves and they're men and they're not too worried about offending people and worried about whatever their thoughts are and not looking over their shoulder. Is there a girl here? Is there someone here to call me rude, to call me sexist, to call me whatever? I mean, dude, just you'll have the funniest conversations, the funniest jokes when those inhibitions are down. And that's part of what comes with being a man. It really is. And I feel like, I think in particular, maybe not our culture, but there's a big group of people in the church and just in common sense, conservative, traditional groups or whatever. They want guys. They understand guys are leaders. They understand guys are protectors. They understand guys create, provide, do everything, fight. And they will say, that's what we want. We want you guys to do that. We want you to step up. We want you to do those things, right? But in reality, they still want to control you. They still don't want you to say everything that's on your mind. They want all that provision, protection, that leadership, everything. But there's parts they don't want. They don't want that essence of being a man where, I'm top dog. And they want that gentle side, the good side, which is part of being a guy. I think men are more loyal in general than women. Women tend to care more, but men can be very loving in their own way, sacrificial, and so those are all good things, and they want that, but they also just don't want the grit with it. They don't want that defiance. They don't want that macho-ness. They don't want it. And that's why, you look around and you see these femboys, at church just with big beaming smiles like, good morning, Um, how's it going? You know? And or the real men are just being quiet in church. I've noticed that. I've definitely noticed that. Some men that I know are men, and they keep it down, man. They know how to bundle that up and tuck it away for Sunday morning service. You know, I'd hate to be overbearing. I'd hate to be, you know, loud. I'd hate to be opinionative, right? And the funny thing is, the women step into that role, man. They become opinionative. They become loud. They become contentious, you know, often, right? So, I think the real guys, they don't want to put up with that battle. Like you want me to be here? You say where are all the good guys at, right? Girls say that. The moms want their daughters to marry men. They don't want them to marry soy boys. And guys try it sometimes, but then they end up getting backlash. They end up getting, hurt because of it. Because we don't live in a culture or a time that respects that understands, hey, it's guys right here. Women are here as the helper. You know, guys are here leading the pack, doing what guys do. And people don't understand that. So when you step into that role, it blows up in your face often. And then you kind of get scared. You get a little gun shy. You start to not speak your mind so much. You start to tone down your masculinity a little bit. And that just happens gradually. And then you kind of end up being a woman, to be honest. And I don't want to be that. I think of like examples, right? Because this would be expected of a corrupt culture, right? With the feminist movement and everything like that. Though I still don't know how it managed to happen. I mean, I kind of do. But I see it in the church, man. I grew up going to church every day, every week, and then often during the week. Involved in everything, dude. I mean, leading small groups, in worship band, everything. So I was steeped in it, man, from a little kid, my whole life. And I wondered, like, why don't I have good friendships in church? The guys I live with right now, some of my best buddies that are out of state right now that I, met at college. Funny enough, a couple of which did not go to church growing up. And just friends I make at the gym. Why am I not making any of these friends in church? And that's not an argument to say you can't. But I just realized that church is not conducive to being yourself. It's not conducive to manliness. A small example of this and how they do it is very subtly, whether it's on purpose or just due to negligence. Or ignorance. Is like, everyone takes their hat off during prayer. They don't wear hats. The guys, they take their hat off during prayer, during worship. They don't wear their hat in the church. You'll just notice it. And it comes from a verse that says men are not to keep their head covered, right, during worship. But it's part of if you read the whole verse or the whole section, the other part is that women are supposed to have their head covered. And why is that? It says the reason why is because it gives various reasons. I don't know if it's in the same verse, but this idea that man came first. God made man and woman came from man. And I think the verse more or less says that women ought to have their head covered as a sign of submission to their husband, particularly their husbands. Women ought to have their head covered and men not, and that shows that women are submissive, shows that they're helpers, and just that order of creation, right, in worship. And that's a perfect example, right? You look around during prayer, you take your hat off and everything like that, and people just instinctively don't wear hats in church. Guys, sorry. And the women aren't keeping their head covered, not one bit, not at all. You're not going to hear anything about it, right? But if you get in a circle and you start praying, you'll notice all the guys take their hat off. And that's how I see culture right now. That's how I see all these young guys, they're asked to take their hat off. They're asked to do, whatever. And then you have the women that aren't held to that standard. They're allowed to roam free, And this isn't necessarily meant to be about women. I didn't want to talk about women on this. But it's hard not to when you're talking about manliness because that's part of that dynamic, right? And wow, my hair is just going crazy today. And I could go down the list. I don't want to waste time. I guess another example is, you're supposed to turn the other cheek, right? And they always taught you that in church. But if you know the full context of it, the idea is that if someone hits you, on your right cheek, it says to turn the other cheek. They'd be hitting you with their right hand. How do they hit your right cheek with their right hand? It's a backhanded hit, right? It's a sign of disrespect that shows, and there's some cultural context that, I just looked into it. It's like, I'm not even going to open hand you. I'm not even going to punch you. I'm going to show us, it's a passive aggressive way to hit someone, like you're beneath me. That's what you're saying when you do that. It still is, even in this culture. backhanded. Um, and what happens when you turn the cheek? Well, you can't backhand that person anymore. If I get hit in the face and I turn my left cheek or I turn my other cheek, you can't. Now you have to punch me straight on with that hand. You can't really you can't really backhand someone that way. So in some ways, I feel like the message has been like, oh, bend over. If someone hits you, just bend over. Just let them hit you again. And that's not the message, dude. The message is, Jesus was flipping tables, right? I don't see Jesus as being just, aside from when he went to the cross, which he did for us out of love, he took it all. He took all the beatings, the spitting, everything for us, right? But he was also a man. Dude made a whip. He made a whip. He took time to make a whip and just kick those people out, man. He was whipping people. He didn't make a whip to just swing it around. He was slashing people in the face with that thing. Like, get out of my Father's house, right? That's the man. That's the Jesus they don't like to talk about, right? In church. But anyways, it's like when someone hits you, it's like, no, I'm not just going to bend over. I'm going to turn my cheek. And what I'm saying to you is I'm saying, hit me, bitch. Hit me in the face. Come on, hit me like a man. I'm not going to let you disrespect me like that again. Fight me. You're forcing them to do that. You're not just letting them hit you again. It's a different message. It's a subtle message, right? And there's a lot of other examples, man, that I can think of. But it just takes too much time. Of just how the church is subliminally just knocked you down, basically, Or like how women are, like guys are, they just ignore all the teachings about women being silent in the church and how, oh gosh, it's been a while since I studied it, but yeah, they just seem to ignore the sex differences, the gender differences, just like our culture has. And I think some of them are surprised and wondering where are all the guys at. It's like, well, they're not there. I can tell you that right now. They're not going there, or maybe they are, but they know how to behave for you guys. They know how to behave for you. So yeah, I think the answer to it is just pushing against that system. You got that resistance, and you can either buckle and become more like a woman and lose your balls, lose your testosterone, or you can do the opposite. You can face the flack. I think doing manly things helps, with that, whether that's smoking cigars or even just like hunting and fishing. I feel like, you could take those test boosters and whatever. And the gym is good, but I feel like the gym bro stuff it gets a little ridiculous. I was in it for a little bit. And I still think it's important to work out and be healthy, right? You want to be strong. I think that's actually an important part, but it's more than just that, It's embracing who you are as an intellectual, philosophical man. And it's tough though, because you won't get support. You won't get support from a lot of the Christians. You won't get support from the people in your culture. And it's tough. But one thing you can do is, and when I've talked about it before, is surrounding yourself with guys that you can trust, guys that are like that, right? That are like that, So, yeah, I think do manly things, speak your mind. Don't be a woman, And I feel like people eventually see that, as more guys do it, as you do it more. And don't be argumentative for being argumentative, for the sake of being argumentative, for the sake of just being a douche, The point is that you're sticking to your guns, right? You're sticking to your word. You're sticking to your guns, what you believe. And I've noticed that too. Even I've had some things that I believed, and to believe them, it helps to talk openly about it. And then you run into people that disagree with you, and you're tempted to be more quiet about it, right? But that's really when you should push back and be like, no, I'm sticking to this. This is what I believe, Whatever that comes out as, right? They may be a little bit more eccentric ideas that maybe I have that I don't think are that crazy, but they are, like women don't need to be going to college, or at least most of them don't need to be going to college, devoting 4 years. Once they become a marriageable age, they spend the next 4 years in college. And then ideally, that's setting them up for their career. And then, parents are wondering, like, why aren't guys dating my girls? Like, it's because they've just been screwing around, since they're in high school and in college, not getting serious, focused on their career, focused on school. And, then they get in their mid to late 20s, they've gained a little bit of weight. They've had a little bit too much fun, if you know what I'm saying. Got some bodies on them, had some plenty of nice party face, right? Because they're like, oh, I'm not, I'm only 20, I'm only 19, I'm only whatever, when in reality it's like, dude, people are having kids by that age, our grandparents, especially generations before that. It's like, it's a new idea, it's a new novel idea to just put your life on hold and just don't have kids till you're in your mid to late 20s. It's new. It's not normal. It's not normal in other cultures and other times in history. It's unique to us, I feel like, or at least this day and age, And but people, you can't argue with stupid, right? So you really can't, unfortunately, if they're not being level-headed with it all. But yeah, no, they're surprised, like, why do they not want to date these women? Why are they not marrying? It's like, I mean, there's your answer right there, dude. There's your answer. And it's definitely a conspiracy for sure. It's like, what are the chances? Right when you turn 18, right when you're not a minor, right when you're at the age of, we send you off to college for 4 years, full time. And there goes 4 years. Now you're 22. Now you got to get involved with, your career for the next few years. And now you're focused on your career. You don't have any time. And guys just don't want to deal with that. Guys do not want to deal with that. Both of my sisters are married. One of them's got a kid. She was married by the time she was like 19, engaged when she was 18. Neither went to college. One's got a little baby, and she's real young. She was the one that married 19. So it's like, that's the way to do it, man. That's the way to do it. He went to college, right? They both did. Both my brother-in-laws. So, I see it, man, and I've got shoot, yeah, I see it. I see it so clearly. And the funny thing is, a lot of guys see it, right? A lot of good men see that, and it's not. I think there's this idea, like people that talk about Nick Fuentes, and his followers, like he's like on the fringe, and there's this group of incels, guys that can't get girls, and guys that are weak Reddit users that are just online all the time. And maybe that's part of the scenario. Maybe there's definitely going to be some guys like that. But I've got some men in my life, that are earning good money, that work out. They're tall, handsome, jacked, good Christian friends, buddies since college, strong in their faith, smart individuals, right? Driven. And they see it just like that, man. They see it the exact same way, and maybe that's because, your friends tend to think like you, but I run into it all the time, even with people that aren't friends of mine that I just talk to, just guys at the gym or guys, friends of friends or whatever. It's a lot of guys are thinking this, and now they're not going to say it for various reasons I've spoken about, right? Not wanting to speak their mind, being taught not to, don't rock the boat. Don't rock the boat. But a lot of guys think like this. A lot of solid guys, too. And, I don't know the answer to it. Maybe the answer is, just continuing to be outspoken about it. The more people that can be outspoken about it, that'll shift the culture, right? Whether you have an online platform or whether you're just talking. Now, I think the key is not to just talk about it with your buddies, right? Not to just have these agreements, and have these thoughts about, we need to be men, we need to express ourselves, etc. And then talking about the issues with like the women these days and the church these days and all that stuff. I think it needs to go beyond that. You need to be willing to put your neck out and almost be like a Nick Fuentes type character. Almost be like, and you don't have to be super smart to do it. Because a lot of it's common sense stuff that you really can't lose on. We're not talking about foreign policy here. I'm not talking about the Jews. I'm talking about just like guys and gals and how guys are and how gals are. And you, as a young guy, if you're watching, in your 20s or whatever, you are more you are in a more valid position to understand this and be able to say anything on it than anyone is, right? Because if we're talking about people that are in their 40s and 50s, like your parents, right? Which is probably where you get a lot of flack from, because I think a lot of young people are starting to just really think this way. Starting to realize the problems with the culture, realize why we're not having kids and why people aren't getting married and all these problems. They're steeped in it. They're experiencing it. So even if they don't particularly, if they're not particularly, maybe they're liberal, they're not particularly traditional in their thinking, they're experiencing the problems, and they may not even be able to point to what the problem is, but they know, hey, something's not right here. Something's wrong here. And so I don't even think you'll run into issues with people your age. You'll probably run into issues with your parents and even older people. People in, whether it's in the church, pastors, Sunday school teachers, or people in your friend groups like the parents, right? When you guys get together for these things, family members, right? Your own parents. They're not in a position to fully understand this. And if anything, we could talk about this later, they're part of the reason it got to this, right? They're part of the reason for the onset of the feminist movement, from the 1920s, but especially later in the 40s and 60s. And, well, not your parents, but even beyond that, and just kind of not knowing their politics, not knowing their history, and not thinking about their kids, right? Love is more than just, hugging your kid when they come home and telling them you love them. It's having their best interest in mind. And when you see a culture going a certain way, or you see something wrong with the church that your young kids are growing up in, right? You need to do something about it. That's real love, right? What is faith without works? Scriptures talks about this. It's dead faith. I think that's the same with love. What is love without works? It's dead. If you see someone that needs a glass of water or that doesn't have a tunic and you say, go, be warm, be filled, that's not love, right? I don't care how much you say you love them. So I think in some ways our parents just turned a blind eye to it, and that might be a conversation for another time. But the point is, you need to be outspoken about it. You need to be outspoken about it in your circles of influence. That's really important. And that's what I try to do, and I ruffle some feathers. I'm not going to lie. I ruffle some feathers. And there's been some people that, I don't talk with anymore probably. But the funny thing is, I think a lot of them will eventually see the truth. And that's part of being a pioneer, part of being smart and seeing this stuff, is you'll see it before they do, especially the other generation. But you have to stick to your guns, dude. Even when it goes against the culture, even when it goes against the preaching and teaching, you got to stick to it, man. And I'm telling you that if it's a well thought out position, if it's backed by truth, then you can just be confident in that. And, maybe people eventually see. I think they're starting to see. And maybe they won't, man. But that's part of being a man. It all comes full circle. That's part of being a man. All the great men in history that had ideas. I have a dream. Maybe other people can't see that dream. Maybe people don't see a reason for needing a dream. They don't see even the problem, right? But the point is, you do. That's the point. You do. And don't let anyone convince you otherwise, right? Yeah, don't let anyone convince you otherwise, and it'll be tempting to just give up on it. I did for a little bit too. I remember at one point I even like I told a few people that, man, I am just so tired of these conversations. I'm just so tired of being the sexist one in the group. The you've changed, Clark one in the group. You've changed. You're no longer who we thought you were or who we raised you up to be. The good little boy, the good boy. You're no longer a good boy. You know, all smiles and all, you know, which is like totally not true. I still have the best of times and fun times with everyone, right? You know, I love to laugh, but when push comes to shove, when we're talking about stuff around the table, when things come up, it's like, you know, what are we? And I've even talked to, church I used to go to. I've even talked to the pastor about it. I was like, Pastor, what are your thoughts on this scripture? Are we obeying it? Are we doing anything about it? And you just get kind of this stupid answer. That's I was really disappointed, to be honest. Well, you can interpret it different ways. It's like, all right, well, and I could say more on that. I could, but I don't want to, because I respect him, but to an extent. But anyways, when you got problems with the church, when you get problems with the way women are being raised these days, when you got problems with the way parents are approaching or not approaching, just completely turning a blind eye to the problems that young men have these days. Which, by the way, these problems you're going to experience them, right? Because we build the culture, man. We build things. You can turn a blind eye to it all you want, but your kids, your grandkids are gonna reap the repercussions. Sounds a little weird. So, but yeah, don't. Yeah, it's really essential to talk about this stuff to let people know it's not this fringe idea. I actually recently got into a bit of a tussle with a different church. He was like he was the pastor's son, and now he's like ahead of the young adult stuff. And he's still a solid guy, but he's grown up and he has kids of his own, and just like some silly stuff. I'm like, dude, I'm just speaking from my generation, my age. I got a lot of friends like this, and he respected me a little bit. He's like, I understand, it's hard to, I sympathize with those things going on. It's like, yeah, you kind of do, but you kind of don't. You're in a position of leadership, and at the very least, you're turning a blind eye, and you're ignoring, you're not really loving your brothers, the young men in your church, by supporting them, by talking about these issues that are so prevalent that these political, secular, freaking Andrew Tate, freaking whoever, they're talking about it, right? And these Christian guys are turning to these guys because they're like, hey, well, we don't agree on everything, but at least, I'm drowning. At least they know I'm drowning. At least they know that my head is underwater and I'm dying here, because the church doesn't. The church, I should say. So they're going other places to non-pastors, non-Christians. And this wasn't supposed to be about church, but yeah, I've experienced it firsthand, man, to a crazy degree, just the positions I've been in and stuff, and yeah, it's just a real problem. And yeah, at the very least, I'm thinking about this one guy. It's like, yeah, maybe you kind of recognize it, but you're also fighting me. You're also like, you are part of the problem. You are part of the problem. And maybe it's because you have your kids, you have your wife, you're all set up, everything you need. And he's just, maybe they just can't see it, right? But I think the biggest way you can fight this is being outspoken about it, which involves being a man. Be willing to ruffle some feathers, dude. Be willing to ruffle some feathers. And the more people can realize, oh, this isn't just some YouTubers or some people on Rumble talking about it. This is like This is a lot of solid guys. And if you have a good reputation and they know you to be a solid individual, that's why I can get away with a lot of the stuff, whereas I say some very controversial things, which, funny enough, not that controversial, pretty common sense. But people know me. They know I'm there for them when they need them. They know I'm a leader. They know that I I'm kind and loving. So when they see who I am, all of a sudden they're conflicted. They're like, "Wow, what he's saying is so but also I know who this man truly is. I have that respect for him. It's like, shoot. So when it's someone on a screen, on a podcast saying it, it's like, well, you can dismiss him as a sexist, a racist, whatever, anti-Semite, whatever. I'm not going to get into that stuff. But you can dismiss it. You can call him names. You can call him an incel. You can do whatever. But when you are a godly man, a man who knows himself, a man who's kind, loving, all those things, but you also express these ideas, these problems that we're all dealing with, right, as young guys. And when people can see that, when they can know who you are and they respect you and they appreciate you and they like to be around you, but then they see, oh, okay, these are his ideas. Then all of a sudden they're like, okay, maybe there might be something to this, because this is not just a lunatic. This isn't just some weird creep. This isn't some guy that's just angry with the world. This is a solid individual. So I think that's the way we fight it. I think that's the biggest way we fight it, man. Just continue to live your truth, walk in honesty. You don't have to be perfect, but just be a man, dude. Be a man. Do some manly things. Be outspoken. Don't be quiet about your opinions, about your thoughts, about the problems going on, dude. Women are the ones that are trying to always keep the peace and be always agreeable, and that was tough for me because I didn't like controversy. I always try to keep the peace, at least growing up. But I soon realized, dude, to be a man, to make change, to protect, to defend, to do all those things, you have to be disagreeable. You have to be honest, even when it's not comfortable. And I think you'll soon grow to actually enjoy it, funny enough. You'll feel more alive when people look at you weird, when people have, those reactions. You'll realize, okay, shoot, yeah, this is me being a man. This is important. So, yeah, talk about it with your friends. But most importantly, just be open about it. Be authentic about your opinions, about your thoughts on this. Don't hide it, Don't hide it, dude. If you got a problem with the way things are, the next step would actually be working to change it. I think that's the biggest thing, finding a solution and doing that. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. Kind of like what I'm working on. But I think the one step you can take is don't keep those opinions hidden, Be outspoken about it. Be outspoken about it. Be kind about it. Be gentle about it. But yeah, be outspoken about it, man. Yeah.